The first regular sessions of class at what is now Iowa State University began in March of 1869. At the time, the total enrollment was 173 students. 160 of those lived on campus. From housing's humble beginnings, the focus was on providing an educational and developmental program for the individual. It is that idea of providing more than food and shelter that has carried Iowa State University's Department of Residence through the years, making it an integral part of the student experience.
Iowa State and the Department of Residence have really combined to provide a home for students. When they arrive on campus, 95+% of new to ISU students live on campus. With the house system, they immediately develop connections to each other. They learn about themselves, they learn about each other, and they learn how to learn. It's a challenging experience to get a degree at Iowa State, and our goal as a community is to provide a home for them where it's a safe space for them to go through this transition, through this process, ultimately graduate.
The first residence hall at Iowa State was Old Main, which housed not only the first 160 on-campus residents, but it also held the entire college. Students brought their own bed ticks, and clean straw was piled outside to change out their beds. In Dr. Welch's first report to the Board of Trustees, one of his recommendations was to build cottages to house the students. 1881 and 1882 saw the construction of the west and east boarding cottages. Margaret Hall was built in 1895 to house women. The building had steam heat, electric lights, bathrooms with hot and cold water, and a dining room that seated 400. The hall was named to honor Margaret McDonald Stanton, the wife of E.W. Stanton, who donated the first 10 bells of the carillon. As Iowa State entered the next century, enrollment was on the rise, and the need to house students was becoming more critical. 1,830 was the enrollment in 1912, with residential housing for 88 women, which was 0.5% of the total enrollment. In 1914, President Pearson issued a statement saying housing would be available to all who wished to enter Iowa State. In 1915, the doors of the first unit of a new residence hall opened with Lyon Hall. Students wanted a cottage system of small buildings that housed small numbers of students, each with its own dining room and parlors. Freeman Hall opened in 1916 and was very similar to Lyon. Barton Hall followed in 1918 and was the first cooperative hall where students did their own cleaning, meal preparation, and other chores to give people a chance to stay in college and keep the cost low. Barton, Lyon, and Freeman Halls still stand today and house men and women. The lodges were built in 1920 and were simple, rustic buildings constructed out of Army surplus supplies. They were meant to be temporary, but ended up being used for 20 years. The early 1920s saw the building of the library, a home economics building, the Memorial Union, and Birch Hall. Birch housed women and had parlors decorated in rose and ivory. Welch Hall connected to Birch and was occupied in 1928. The Women's Residence Association also had its beginnings in 1928 when the women of the residence halls organized the Dormitory Council, the overall government for the undergraduate halls. The final piece of BWR, as it is known today, was Roberts Hall, which was occupied by women in 1936. Today, Birch, Welch, and Roberts Halls make up Iowa State's only all-male residence hall. The largest, and some would argue the best-known residence hall on campus, got its start in 1927. Friley Hall was built over a 25-year period, and when it was done, it had a population greater than the population of 75% of the incorporated towns in Iowa. Hughes Hall was built in 1927, followed by a separate hall, Friley, in 1939. In 1942, the second edition opened with large rooms, a large kitchen and dining hall, and it was immediately occupied by Navy men training for World War II. The first occupants left this message for future occupants. May Friley Hall take its place in the post-war college as a real potential in creating high standards in student living and in the development of a fine, constructive college spirit. And develop the college spirit they did. The students who lived in Friley from 1946 to 1958 were pioneers in creating a flexible, democratic framework that served both their individual and group needs. The house system still used today started in 1949 when the Men's Residence Association organized Hughes into its own house and Friley into 12 houses.
The Department of Residence was built on a house system, and the leader of the house was really twofold. One was the house president, and one was the resident assistant. The resident assistant is the person that we put in that position. This person has the leadership skills that can help the Department of Residence from a staffing standpoint, so we place that person in the house. The house, or the community, then decides this is who we want to represent our community as a house president. The combination of the two of them working together to build a community.
The house system is pretty unique to Iowa State. It's literally a very formalized version of self-governance in the beautiful tradition of Iowa politics, of towns coming together and being very invested in how their community is run. We've taken that and shrunk it down to a residence hall floor and said, here's your constitution. If you don't like it, vote in amendments. Here's your money. You get to decide how to use it. You have an ability to impact how your floor looks. Vote to decorate the hallways to reflect what you care about most and what's important to you so that when you come home, you feel like it's home, even though you might be 10, 100, 1,000 miles from home. When I think about a university's responsibility to educate students for citizenship, the health system is an incredible first step.
1951 brought another addition to Friley that added student rooms, offices, food stores, a maintenance shop, library, lounges, and the terrace room. The fourth edition in 1954 connected Friley and Hughes halls and also added a new underground air-conditioned dining room. In 1964, food stores were expanded to account for the growth in the campus dining program. Friley became co-ed in 1969. Friley Dining closed its doors in 2003, and students who live in the area now dine at the Union Drive Marketplace. Elm Hall was built in 1938 and marked the 7th residence hall for women. Oak Hall followed in 1940. In 1942 and 43, the women of Oak and Elm were relocated to fraternities because Navy men used the hall to train for war. In 1965, an addition opened linking the two buildings to make them one. The renovation brought with it a dining center. Oak Elm Dining was renovated in 2010 and reopened as Conversations Dining. Those living in both the men's and women's residence halls benefited greatly from house mothers who played an important role in student development from the beginning, serving as cooks, disciplinarians, and moms away from home. At one time or another, all campus residence halls were used to assist in the war effort. Colonel Pride, the director of the Memorial Union, was called into service in 1942. President Friley called J.C. Schilletter and said, "Schilletter, you've just been elected managing director of the Union." Schilletter thought someone was pulling a joke and started to laugh. He then realized it was Dr. Friley and replied, "Hell, Dr. Friley, I don't know anything about running the Union." The president said, "There's a war on and you're being drafted. All you have to do is put up a big front. We'll get you plenty of help." Schilletter had been a teacher in the horticulture department for 20 years and said, "I had no idea of the responsibility I was to carry during the next 4 years." J.C. Schilletter was appointed director of residence in 1946 when Colonel Pride returned from the war. Under Schletter's leadership, he guided the department through the most critical housing shortage the campus had ever seen. Returning veterans, half of whom were married, needing housing. Pamela Court had its beginning in 1946 when trailers and demountable houses from World War II housing projects in Nebraska and Wisconsin were brought to campus.
Pamela was perfect for us at that point in our lives. We didn't demand much back then. We didn't need much. We basically just wanted a place to lay our heads, and we got a lot more than that. It was $36 a month. I mean, it was reasonable in terms of cost. Plus, it was close to classes. We were both students. Lynn came a few months later. Lynn is our oldest daughter, and by the time she was born, then we needed to deal with childcare. So either we would arrange our own schedules so that we could go back and forth, or we had friends who also had children, and we would just do trade babysitting that way.
It was a one-bedroom unit. The bedroom maybe was 8 feet by 9 feet, not very big. And then a kitchen that was maybe 6 feet by 8 feet. You had to provide your own refrigerator and stove. And then the living room was maybe 12 feet long by 8 feet wide, so not very big.
The Pamela grocery and laundromat were across the street, and so the wagon got a lot of use with our daughter, and then the laundry, going back and forth to get the housekeeping kinds of things done. I think for us it meant we could both still go to school. Because we were able to stay in Pamela and keep our expenses down, I think that made the difference. It may have been small and it may have had some issues, but it was a wonderful place to live.
Schletter's leadership also brought the head resident in 1950, an early form of today's community advisor. It was agreed that the head residents had several roles to play: friend, counselor, leader, disciplinarian, example, and administrator.
A CA is gonna know where my classes are and help me get to that building. They're going to be able to direct me to a tutor when I feel like that impossible math class I just can't pass. Or I bring home that first test and I'm used to getting all A's in high school and I got a C+, who can say, it's not the end of the world. There's lots of ways that you can impact this. College is a little harder than what you've experienced before, but look at what we have at the university. Someone who's gonna help you find connections socially. I know my neighbors because my CA kind of brokered that relationship and brought us all together to have pizza or to go play frisbee on the quad or whatever it was. And also someone who I can knock on their door in the middle of the night and say, I'm scared, I have a problem, I need something, or I don't know what to do. And they might not have the answer, but they can get me connected to what I need.
Hawthorne Court was an apartment-style complex built in 1956 and 1959. Today, the site is home to Frederiksen Court. In 1955, the university saw an increased enrollment in women and needed to find housing quickly. Westgate Hall received national attention because it was an experiment to build something non-conventional at a low cost per bed. Westgate had 2 rooms connected with baths and a den or lounge space. The housing administration at the time took heat because the single women living in Westgate were required to eat with the single men living in Friley, marking the first time men and women dined together on a regular basis. Westgate was torn down in 2003. Helser Hall was built in 1957 as a men's hall on the site of what was the university's baseball field for many years. The building is named for Dean Helser, a well-liked professor who went on to be the director of student affairs. He was so well-liked that in 1955, students presented him with the new Cadillac as part of Operation Rainbow. Today, Helser Hall houses around 700 men and women. Tentative plans for Linden Hall were developed before World War II, but construction was delayed due to the need to house returning veterans and the cost being higher than estimated. That high cost continued to delay the project until the need to house women was so desperate it was approved. When the hall opened in 1957, it operated as two separate halls, East Linden and West Linden. They merged as one hall in 1967. Table service existed in Linden Dining until 1965. Today, the dining space is used as a training facility for the 1,600 dining student employees. The Gables was originally built in 1880 by A.S. Welch. It became part of the university in 1928 and housed international students. It was known as the International House until 1963, when plans for Buchanan Hall replaced the structure with a building that could serve both international and graduate students. At the time Buchanan opened in 1964, it was the tallest building on campus. Buchanan was renovated in 2002 and now houses students of any age from anywhere in the world. In 1967, President Parks created the first vice president for student affairs position at Iowa State. He realized there was more involved to campus housing and food service than providing shelter and food.
The majority of our students are traditional college age, and so you have these developmental challenges that take place, coming from high school to college, going from being an adolescent to being a young adult, and you don't just flip a switch and do that. It's a transition, and Iowa State has a system that's been in place for a long time that really helps support that transition. It is a culture. It's a part of the fabric at this institution, and I was very pleased to see how well regarded Student Affairs was, and in particular Department of Residence, with their commitment to the educational aspect of the institution. There's just a number of things that's done that a lot of institutions don't do. And every day you come to work, you hope that you'll touch at least one student and try to make a difference in at least one student's life.
Charles F. Frederiksen became the third person to hold the title Director of Residence. Frederiksen came to Iowa State as a student in the fall of 1949 from Exira, Iowa, and was appointed the head resident of Godfrey House.
All along, my plan was to get my PhD and teach. I wanted to be at the university. And I received a letter in the mail from Dr. Schletter, the Director of Residence, while I was over at Clark Air Force Base. And he offered me a job, saying he wanted to establish a full-time position working with the head residents and with student government, and would I be interested. Well, my wife and I did some soul searching about, hey, this isn't at all where I thought I was going, but I am still going to be interested in staying at the university and doing something that so far I've really liked and enjoyed a lot. And so over there, I sent a letter back saying, sounds good to me. Came back and filled that spot, and then had the good fortune of becoming assistant director and director. And each time with a commitment that, hey, I'm in the right place. I'm dealing with people, I'm dealing with education. It's in the state I love, and the numbers of people that I could touch and reach out to that were important in my life. And it's been a very rewarding career.
Knapp and Storms were built in 1965 and 66 on the site of the old poultry farm. The towers opened to house men and became co-ed in 1970. Wallace and Wilson followed Knapp and Storms. Knapp and Storms halls were imploded in 2005 due to the cost to repair and maintain the buildings outweighing the cost to implode them.
When I first started as director in 2005, 3 weeks into this, we were actually taking down 2 residence halls, Knapp and Storms. I carried around pieces of that building in my truck for over a year because I had former residents wanted that little memento from their time at Knapp Storms, a deep affinity to that. You know, even today students talk a little bit about the distance from campus that Knapp Storms and Wallace Wilson provided. They were a little nervous when they first moved in. Within 3 weeks, you can't get them to move elsewhere. I mean, they connect that quickly to each other. They connect to the community. Their affinity is established quickly, and then it lasts for a long time.
Today, the Knapp Storms Common serves as dining area for students living in Wallace and Wilson, and is also used as ISU Dining's bakery and commissary kitchen. Wallace and Wilson were recently renovated with kitchenettes on every floor, new bathrooms, and new furniture. Today, the buildings are home to around 1,000 ISU students. Schilletter and University Village were built in 1965 and 1968 when land became available near the golf course. The area was used to house families. Today, Schilletter Village houses students with families, and University Village houses single students. Maple, Willow, and Larch were built from 1967 to 1971. They were the first buildings to be completely air-conditioned from the university's central plant. Maple Hall was renovated in 1998, Willow Hall was updated in 2014, and Larch will be updated in 2015. The dining space was renovated in 2009 and now operates as Seasons Marketplace. The first Frederiksen Court apartments were built in 2000 on the site of the former Hawthorne Court. The four-person apartment gave students an opportunity to be connected to campus but live more independently. With enrollment growing and more students choosing to return to campus housing, 6 more buildings were added to Frederiksen Court for fall of 2014, adding 720 additional beds.
The concept of a full apartment community for single students was still very new. We weren't the first university, but I remember there were a lot of eyes on us of, was this going to work? When I think back on the last 15 years, it was the CAs and the student leaders immediately that connected with this community that really helped shape much of what we did and much of what we've become. We truly can be what we claim to be, and that's a cyclone home. It's not just giving the students a place to live, a roof over their head, a place to sleep, but it's giving them those things and more. The greatest thing that we can provide that off-campus folks cannot provide is the connection to campus services. Those are our colleagues. Those are the people that we collaborate with sometimes on a daily basis. Service, the fact that it's not just a place to live, but it's a place to succeed. We often say we're the best of both worlds. You know, we're apartment living, we're independent living, but with the support of the university and the support of our department if they need that.
Eaton Hall welcomed its first residents in the fall of 2002. The east part of Helser was taken down to make room for Eaton and its neighbor, Martin. In the suite-style hall, 2 rooms were connected with a bathroom, and there were lounges, kitchenettes, and study areas on each floor. Barton Hall opened in the fall of 2003 and was also a suite-style building. Martin Hall is named for Archie and Nancy Martin. The Martins provided rooms for African American students who attended Iowa State College in the 1930s and 40s. From the beginning, Iowa State has always welcomed students of color. But until the late 1940s, the unofficial campus residence policy stated that students of color had to room together, which meant that students had to find housing off campus.
They provided a lot of the services that were not available at the time to students of color. So very critical to Iowa State University, to the overall development. And these were people who were not well educated formally. They were probably much brighter than a lot of people because, you know, they had to figure out how to make it, and they valued education. As I realized their contribution, you could really name the Dean of Students, the Archie and Nancy Martin Dean of Students office. The dining facilities, I mean, they did all of that for students of color. They have a heck of a legacy, and I'm very pleased, I'm proud that Iowa State saw fit to formally recognize their contributions. Even though they were not alums, they were not college graduates, I'm just really proud and pleased that they did that. And I think once again, it speaks very highly of Iowa State University and what it's all about.
The first 100 years of residential housing at Iowa State spanned from 1868 to 1968. J.C. Schilletter chronicled that history in his book, The First 100 Years of Residential Housing at Iowa State University. As he thought about the next 100 years in residential housing, he left us with these words. The second 100 years will witness profound and spectacular changes with transformations in size, organizations, and programs that were witnessed during the first 100 years. But the basic problem of teaching respect for authority, respect for property, respect for our fellow man, and respect for democracy and good citizenship will persist. It would seem our main consideration for the future is not primarily growth in the size of residential housing, but rather a fulfillment amidst changing conditions of the motivating idea that residential housing is a part of the total educational program and that the residence halls are the best laboratories on campus for teaching democracy.
We take that large entering class, that large community, and we break it down into smaller pieces. And we can't take credit for it today. This was the foresight of people like Doc Schilletter and Chuck Frederiksen and others who realized that Iowa State's a special place. We make a large university feel very personal, very much about them.
I hope we demonstrate, without having to say it in words, that we care about them as an individual. That we see you have a name that makes you unique, and we will respect that uniqueness and attempt to build on it with you.
We've always been one of the largest residence systems in the nation. I mean, we're currently in the top 20. We're housing over 12,000 students. That isn't unique to Iowa State. In the 80s, we were at over 11,000 students. Students have lots of choices on where they live, and no one's required to live on campus. So when we see 95+% of the campus community students choose to live on campus that are new to Iowa State, they value it. That, coupled with enrollment growth, has really created a circumstance or an opportunity for us to serve more and more students under a community that cares about their success. So for the future, we've built over 700 apartments in the last 18 months, and we're also looking to add residence hall space. So we're adding around 700 residence hall beds or more. Sometime in the next couple years is the plan. And so the future is accommodate that growth in enrollment, accommodate that growth in interest in living on campus, continue to focus on their success, their experiences, and adjust as they change over the course of time. But this is something Iowa State's done for decades. You look at the post-World War II, we saw a huge jump in enrollment, housing growth went up. Post-Vietnam, we saw a huge growth in enrollment and a big jump in housing. This is something we've done many, many times. You can just look to the history to inform our practice moving forward. If we're listening to students, we're doing the right things. They'll tell us, and that's really what our brand is about.
It's a commitment to small group housing and living in an environment that keeps growing, and one that gets bigger and bigger. And how do you maintain this small group atmosphere and feeling instead of getting lost in the ocean? And I think Iowa State has done a tremendous job, and all the folks who were there when I was and those who have continued since have had that same challenge with a huge and growing enrollment. How do you keep the numbers from being more important than the people? You're still thinking and seeing every day students walking by and saying, hey, I'm in the right place and I need to help that student. So I think that's pretty neat that even at a university that's growing and into the 30,000s, that we still care about the person and keep them in an environment that they can manage.
You know, I came to Iowa State in 1989. It didn't take me very long to realize it was a very special place. And it fundamentally starts with all these new students who come to Iowa State. The first place they live is with us. We're the front door, we're the welcome mat for all these students who attend Iowa State. We get them off to the right start. When they start calling Ames and Iowa State home, then we know we've done our job.